This map of 17th century India shows the massive, sprawling footprints of the Mughal Empire and the Deccan Sultanates. But tucked away down here in the Western Ghats is a tiny, isolated focal point. Looking at this overwhelming contrast in size, you have to ask how a movement born in such a narrow, rugged strip of land managed to defy and eventually overtake these giant empires. The answer starts before any swords were drawn, with a cultural awakening known as the Bhakti movement. Spiritual poets and seekers began sharing their messages not in elite court languages, but in Marathi, the language of the local masses. By creating a shared literature and devotional practice, they bridged deep social divisions and forged a unified regional identity. That cultural unity found its political voice in a young leader named Shivaji Maharaj. From a very young age, his mother, Jijabai, immersed him in local epics and instilled in him a powerful concept, Swaraja, or self-rule. She taught him that their people did not have to live under the authority of distant sultans or emperors. To make self-rule a reality, Shivaji looked at the Sahyadri range around him. Instead of seeing an inhospitable wilderness, he saw a natural fortress. He realized that the heavy cavalry and massive infantry formations of his enemies were nearly useless on steep, heavily forested inclines. By combining a deeply rooted cultural identity with an intimate mastery of this impenetrable terrain, Shivaji mobilized local farmers and tribesmen. What began as a scattered series of regional rebellions rapidly solidified into a highly organized sovereign movement. To fight these massive conventional armies, the Marathas pioneered a highly effective form of guerrilla warfare. Small, highly mobile cavalry units would emerge from the tree line, strike a slow-moving imperial column with total surprise, and vanish back into the hills before the enemy could even organize a counterattack. The backbone of this hit-and-run strategy was a network of fortified hill forts. By capturing and reinforcing these high-altitude positions, a remarkably small garrison could monitor enemy movements, secure supply lines, and control vast, lucrative trade routes winding through the valleys below. This reliance on preparation and surprise was proven when the Bijapur Sultanate sent their veteran general Afzal Khan to crush Shivaji. Knowing Khan had a reputation for deceptive negotiations, Shivaji wore iron armor hidden beneath his clothes and concealed a small weapon known as a wagnak, or tiger's claw, in his hand. When Khan attempted to stab him during a diplomatic embrace, Shivaji survived the blow and immediately struck back, neutralizing the threat. He used similar psychological tactics against the Mughals. When the heavily guarded Mughal general Shaiz Khan occupied Shivaji's own childhood home of Lal Mahal, Shivaji led a small, surgical night raid straight into the general's quarters. Shaista Khan barely escaped through a window, losing a few fingers in the process, and promptly retreated from the region entirely. These encounters sent a shockwave across the subcontinent. The Marathas proved that sheer numbers and imperial wealth meant very little if an opponent could dictate exactly where, when, and how a battle was fought. Maintaining Swaraja required the Marathas to develop a comprehensive system of civil administration and law. Shivaji's goal was to transition from a successful military resistance into a permanent, functioning state that prioritized the welfare of its subjects. This structural flowchart illustrates the Ashtapradhan, the governing mechanism of the Maratha state. Instead of relying on a single, absolute monarch, authority branched down to a council of 8 distinct ministers handling finance, foreign affairs, intelligence, and justice. Crucially, these officials were paid directly from the state treasury and promoted entirely on merit, breaking the old tradition of handing out hereditary land grants. To sustain a salaried government and a standing army, the treasury needed a reliable engine. They established the chowth, a tax amounting to 25% of a province's revenue, collected from territories outside direct Maratha control. They also applied an additional 10% levy, known as the Sardeshmukhi. In exchange for paying these taxes, the outer provinces received a strict guarantee. The Marathas would protect them from external invasions and completely refrain from interfering in their internal local governance. This revenue model solved a massive logistical problem. By creating a centralized administrative blueprint funded by negotiated taxation rather than constant looting, the Marathas built an economic engine capable of long-term survival. that survival strategy extended to the coastline. Recognizing the sea as a vulnerable frontier, they commissioned heavy coastal defenses like the Sindhudurg fort and built a dedicated Maratha navy under the command of Kanhoji Angre to protect local fishing and trade from European incursions. At the time, European navies dominated the waters by forcing Indian merchants to purchase a kartas or trade pass just to sail safely. The Maratha ships challenged this monopoly directly, demanding that European vessels purchase Maratha passes instead, effectively neutralizing foreign economic control over their waters. Curious, slightly lighter tone. While securing their borders, they also secured their cultural identity.
The state actively replaced Persian, the standard court language of the Deccan Sultanates, with indigenous Marathi and Sanskrit in all official diplomacy and state documentation. This cultural revival was largely sustained by remarkable Maratha women. Leaders like Queen Ahilya Bai Holkar directed massive state funds toward public welfare, rebuilding destroyed temples, constructing roads, and restoring vast cultural sites like this complex at Maheshwar, effectively tying the state's legitimacy to the preservation of local heritage. By securing the seas, writing laws in the local tongue, and funding public architecture, the Marathas transitioned from a rugged military rebellion into a culturally rich, fully realized empire. But holding an empire together requires a steady center, and after Shivaji's death, that center began to shift. As the state expanded, the heavy burden of daily administration and complex diplomacy slowly transitioned away from the Chhatrapati, the king, and fell to the Peshwas, the appointed prime ministers. Under capable Peshwas, the Marathas launched a massive pan-Indian military campaign. They pushed their cavalry far past the Deccan Plateau, striking into the north, capturing Delhi, and completely subordinating the remnants of the once mighty Mughal Empire. This map shows how massive expansion changed the shape of the government. You can see authority diffusing outward from Pune into a decentralized Maratha confederacy. Major regional commanders established their own semi-independent chiefdoms, like the Shindes in Gwalior, the Holkars in Indore, and the Bonsles in Nagpur. This structure was a double-edged sword. Delegating power to regional chiefs allowed for incredibly rapid territorial growth across a massive continent, but it also bred deep internal rivalries. Commanders began prioritizing their own regional wealth over the stability of the central state. As a result, the Marathas successfully became the largest political power in the Indian subcontinent, but in the process, they eroded the unified, singular command structure they desperately needed to survive the threats massing on their borders. Those internal fractures eventually proved fatal. Continuous warfare stretched military supply lines to their breaking point, and the constant political maneuvering between the regional chiefdoms drained the treasury. The breaking point arrived in 1761 at the Third Battle of Panipat against invading Afghan forces. The Marathas suffered a catastrophic defeat, dealing a permanent blow to their military cohesion and wiping out a generation of experienced commanders. This historical map from 1780 shows the result of that weakness, mounting geopolitical pressure from the British East India Company. Unable to present a united front, the divided Maratha chiefs fought a series of grueling Anglo-Maratha wars. One by one, the territories fell, culminating in their ultimate, final defeat in 1818. While the Maratha political state collapsed, its century of rule successfully demonstrated that an indigenous power could dismantle imperial dominance and administer a continent using its own laws and language. This model of local sovereignty remained deeply embedded in the subcontinent's cultural memory long after the 1818 defeat. The political empire ended, but the precedent of self-rule remained. By proving that imperial control was not inevitable, the Maratha legacy provided a vital psychological reference point for the national movements that would emerge to challenge colonial rule a century later.